Well, welcome to Compliance Capers again on our final Friday in April. So we should be moving into our Mayflowers here pretty soon because our April showers are ending. As usual, I am with my good friend and colleague Sonal Patel. So thanks, Sonal, and welcome to our latest Compliance Capers.
Yes, my friend. Hey, happy Friday. And yeah, I can't believe this month is over so quickly. April was a shorter month, a rainier month, but you're right. May is definitely going to pop up with some spring blooms. So we're looking forward to that. But yeah, happy Friday and TGIF for sure.
Yes. As I had stated in our last Compliance Capers, our final self-disclosure that we're going to discuss today is the one that we have seen a little bit more publicity on, which is the Penn State self-disclosure. As we said in the very first Compliance Capers of the month on self-disclosures, that usually when a self-disclosure is made, they do the online submission. If you go and look at that link that I sent that had where the self-disclosures were, you could look through them, but they usually don't put it out everywhere that, hey, these people are doing this because you're self-disclosing. So they're kind of giving you a little grace. But both of us, we've talked with Penn State, I don't know why they decided to make an additional press release about it, but unless it's either because it's the annual wellness visits that it's centering around, and that's something that Medicare wants to make sure, hey, if you're doing these, make sure you're doing it right.
Get it right.
Look what happened to these guys, or if there was something like that going on. Again, with the self-disclosure, sometimes we're kind of guessing, but in this one, the DOJ actually did a press release about it, and it still doesn't give a ton of information because they just don't when you self-disclose, but it is something that's in addition to the self-disclosure. And so I know that more people have been discussing this. I actually did a Friday Fraudsters on it where I posted about it a month ago, or 2 months ago now that we're at the end of April. So discussing, the fact that, I was just kind of amazed at what they had done, that nobody for 11 years had figured this out. So, but we'll get into the nitty gritty in a minute about it. But so I think this one, some of the people that are watching today will be like, oh, I remember I heard about that or I saw it.
That's
Whereas
right.
with all the other ones, most people are just like, no idea. So I didn't even know these were going on. So
Exactly.
this one is a little bit more notorious. Maybe it's because it's Penn State, I don't know. But yes, they kind of put this one out a little bit more to people to say, hey, watch these. And I didn't let me put our little ticker on down there. So in case anybody forgot.
Anybody forgets where they are. Yeah.
Us older ladies and our those of us who are menopausal, we're forgetting everything.
Sometimes
so
we
in
forget.
case I need to figure out where I'm at, it's helping for me too. So today we're going to take a look at the self-disclosure of Penn State. We've said that a couple times, but what they are in for, or self-disclosure about, was annual wellness visits. So first, this is another one where the link to the self-disclosure is way too big to fit in one of the little banners. So I made a little PowerPoint slide on it to put the whole thing in there. But we will put it in the chat for the LinkedIn broadcast here so that y'all can just copy and paste it rather than trying to, write all of that down for a link. But from the self-disclosure, it's, it didn't give a whole ton of information, just how much they paid back and what they did. So, Sonal, from that perspective, what did the actual self-disclosure say?
So, the actual self-disclosure said that Penn State Health agrees to pay more than $11 million following its voluntary disclosure of improper billings related to Medicare annual wellness visits. It goes into a little bit of detail, which says that they submitted these claims to Medicare for annual wellness visit services that were not supported by the medical record. By the medical record, right? So that's, again, probably what gave all of us pause as we saw this come out in your Friday Fraudster post. Again, like you stated, because this is Penn State Health. Also because this is for annual wellness visits, which those of us in the field know that there's a lot that goes on in the annual wellness visit, right? It's not just a simple cut and dry service. There's a lot of things that have to go into its performance, not only with the practitioner and the patient in the room, the actual, actions and services, what they're seeing on your body, head to toe, how they're talking to you. But you yourself also have to do a lot of legwork as the patient and provide a lot of background information on yourself. And then there's a lot of documentation capture that must be met for these types of AWV services. So, your Friday Fraudster post really hit home for me. I know, because you're a numbers nerd, as you self-proclaimed here a few weeks ago on another Compliance Capers, but you did the math for us and you said, Penn State Health did not know this was going on for the span of like 11 years. So that's a very long time. How could you not know? Because you should be performing audits. You should be self-auditing. So if you were actually doing that, you could have caught this issue so much earlier, like your post alluded to, right? The reason why we always implore self-auditing is to help you identify any small deficiencies really quick and really quickly make a corrective action just like that. So these things don't pile up and accumulate to 11 years. I mean, that's such a long time, right? Yeah. So that was shocking when you put all the dots out and you were like, it's 11 years. And I was like, what? That's so long.
Yeah.
So
there's many things that it makes me with you talking about finding those small deficiencies. I had a client that came to me because they had the EHR system they had used. They closed the notes, but they didn't lock the notes. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So when the payor was requesting their medical records,
oh boy,
and they were printing them off, they were showing that they were all signed on the date that they were printed, not the date the service was done.
Right.
And sent them off. So of course the payor went, well, no, these visits from 2 years ago aren't valid because you signed them like 2 days ago or what. And it was, no, I did it back when, and they said, well, prove it to us. And there's no way he could, because they didn't lock them when they did them. So there were no dates on any of the signatures. Now this had been for 2 to 3 years. Now, if there was an audit that had been done, that's one of the things I know, because you and I have done audits together. One of the things we always verify is that it is signed correctly, electronically, with a date and with all of the necessary components on it. So if those records had been looked at that time, somebody would have said, hey, none of these notes are signed, so it would have been caught. And so it wouldn't have been years worth of notes that are now, not signed in the record for the date on which they were performed, so just that little thing, you can catch those kind of little things that could turn into huge things,
Yes.
or like we've always said, missing revenue where
Mhm.
you are not reporting some services, like with
Right.
the annual wellness. We'll get into the components in a minute, but I find with those too, a lot of times there are separately reportable services that can be done with annual wellness visits, but not everybody knows that. And
Yeah,
so they're documenting them, but they're not capturing the additional coding for it.
that's
So
right.
it's revenue that they're just leaving on the table.
Mhm.
So, audits people, I just, it really, they pay for themselves, if not in missed revenue, in compliant protection and protecting
Yes.
yourself. So you're not paying back
Yep.
these huge amounts because you caught something and nipped it in the bud, So now on the DOJ issue, they did put out a press release that you were talking about too. So this is where y'all can find the press release that the DOJ put out. And Sonal and I were kind of chatting a little bit too about like why. And like I said, I
Mhm.
think it's, they're wanting to highlight these annual wellness visit issues, right?
Yes.
And make sure that people are paying
Mhm.
attention to this. And the amount of over $11 million is nothing. It was almost 12 million. In fact, that's nothing to sneeze at. So they actually did an extra step and put a press release out about it. And
Mhm.
that's the one that I put on when I did my post, was off
Right.
of the press release when I looked at it.
Yep.
Because it was just, 7 years, 11 years, 7 years of doing it. I'm thinking 11 million, I'm getting 11 years, but
Oh, sorry. I think I might have said 11 years also. Sorry. I
I
apologize to
mean,
the audience if I started that miscommunication. Sorry about that.
that's just, that should have been caught well
Right.
before, that long, and that payback that they did for, not doing that, documenting those things correctly would have been much, much less.
Yeah.
And maybe, they wouldn't have made the additional press release about it at that time either. You know what I
Exactly.
mean? I mean, if it had been like, it was 7 years, it wasn't
I
like,
know.
oh,
They
we
wouldn't have
just did
rolled
this
out
for
the red
6 months.
carpet
Yeah.
from the DOJ. Exactly. Exactly. No, sorry. We don't mean to laugh at it, but these are
Exactly.
serious
Yes.
things, right?
Yes.
Because coding, as we know, is complicated. It is not just a simple 5-digit, you know, keystrokes that you're typing. There's so much more that goes into codes and the background and the definition and then the components of it and then the documentation requirements that are required.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not just something that, like in the old days, it was just something that anybody could do. Any person could just become a coder. Like, no, there's so much education that goes into being a qualified and then certified coder. Um, because once you have people like that on your team, they are there to help you make sure that you're doing things correctly, not only making sure that the code is correct to go out on those claims, but then that provider is actually documenting for that code appropriately in the patient medical record. So, there's a lot that's involved, a lot of missteps that can happen. But once we understand that we're all on the same team, things we can hope can go a lot smoother for our practices. Yeah.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I say a lot of times it's not always just about the code. Sometimes the coding, the actual coding, is the easiest part of it. You think about critical care,
Yeah.
right? There are only a couple codes in there. It's all of the guidelines that go behind it of,
That's
how
right.
many of these different procedures are bundled into critical care. What I can't report separately from critical care? What makes the patient critical versus that, all of that. That's the hard part. I mean, you can
Exactly.
put a code, a
Mhm.
CPT code and an ICD-10 code on the claim form and get paid.
That's right.
So that sometimes is the least of the issue. The issue is all of the background stuff.
Mhm.
And with annual wellness visits, it definitely is. because there are only a couple codes for annual wellness visits. It's not like there are, 50 different codes and you're trying to choose and they're truncated and what, like when you look at some of the scopes and stuff, and you're like, which one of those did they do? And did they do more than one? And, no, it's like, is it the first time or is it not the first time,
Right. That's it.
There's the, that's it. That's as hard as it goes. Or are they in the FQHC? Because as we both said, there are actually 3 codes for annual wellness. And, the 2 are the normal ones that most of us use.
Yeah.
And then they have another one that's made for specifically for FQHCs to use. So here is a link for the Medicare Learning Network made a tool for annual wellness visits, and it's just
fantastic.
I think.
Great.
And it not only has the annual wellness visit stuff on it, it also has the IPPE, which is that Welcome to Medicare exam that patients can have one time once they are on Medicare within that first year. There's criteria. There's criteria for everything when Medicare is involved, but it has stuff for the IPPE on there. And it also, which I find funny, also has a thing for routine physicals. So if you look on this link, it'll have the IPPE, which is the initial preventive physical exam. That's what IPPE stands for those of y'all that didn't know, but everybody calls it the Welcome to Medicare exam. And then they have the annual wellness visits, or the AWVs. And then on the next one, it has routine physical exam. So all 3 of them are in this one tool. But under the routine physical exam, it just says, we don't pay for it.
We don't pay for it.
You can have it if you want, but but it's got nothing to do with us. But we'll throw it in there because when people think of this, they think of the IPPE and the annual wellness visit as routine physicals. And I really try hard with my clients that do these kind of services. Please stop calling it a physical. It's not a physical. That's not what these things are. They're specific. In fact, for the annual wellness visit, you're really not doing a physical. There's no portion of what the requirements are, of actually doing a physical exam on the patient. You're doing other things that you're checking on. It's a visit to check on their statuses and that they're getting all of the right care on the right schedule, all that kind of stuff. So it is nowhere near what those of us that are not Medicare age yet, when you go to your physician for your yearly physical, that's nothing like what the annual wellness visit is. So they just kind of put it out there that like routine physical, that's not us. So if a patient wants one, they can have one, but the patient bears the cost of having a routine physical. So even with us that have commercial payors, either sometimes they'll have so much or so many dollars that are set aside for preventive care of the year, and you can do with it whatever you want. Some of them will have, like mine, I can get a physical exam every year, routine physical, an annual physical, but I have to make sure that 366 days go by before I have the next one. So in fact, I'm, coming up on mine. And when I made the appointment for it, they were like, well, last year you came on this day. And so they were going to have me come like 2 days before, because they were just looking for around that. I was like, no, we have to go after, the 28th, because then if it's before, and so you're like, oh, that's right. So, then they start futzing with it. So, the commercial payors can be, putting some specifics in there, but they don't just flat out, Medicare just flat out forget it, so just that's a hard no from us. But on this thing, it does go into those things. And with the criteria for the annual wellness, if you go to the annual wellness section in this tool, what I like about the tool too is it's all interactive. So if you click on the annual wellness visits from those 3 things that they have at the beginning that I was talking about, if you click on it, it'll show you all the components. And this is where Penn State went awry, I think, because it says they didn't meet the criteria, it didn't support the service. And with these components, they're just telling you here is a list of
It's a
everything you
roadmap.
need to do, right?
It's a
Exactly.
roadmap. Yes.
If you want to get paid, this is what you got to do, and so they put out the HRA, which is the health risk assessment. So they tell you what's included in that. So if you take a look at it, it can be,
Yep.
self-reported. You also need to do a
Yes.
self-reported patient portion. So the patient has to fill out a whole bunch of stuff too for these
Yes, they
annual
do.
wellness visits. And then it tells you at a minimum, it has to have these 4 or 5 things. So if
Yep.
you look at the annual wellness visit, there are 13 different criteria. Some
Wow.
of them may be optional.
Mhm.
But if you look at each piece, like if you're looking at the tool, it'll have, for example, number 1, review the patient's medical and social history. And then it'll tell you at a minimum what that means to us is it has to have their past medical and surgical history, has to have their current medications and supplements, has to have a family history, has to have their diet, has to have physical activities, has to have social activities, has to have alcohol, tobacco, and illegal drug use history. So those are musts in that
Right. They
section.
have to.
If you go over and above, that's great, but you have to have at a minimum that information. And then it'll go to the second thing, which is reviewing the patient's potential depression risk factors. And then once again, it includes their current or past experiences with depression, their other mood disorders they may have. So, it will just give you everything that has to be in there. So for those of y'all that are doing templates in your EHR for annual wellness visits, there you go. There's the
There you
stuff that
go.
you need to have
Yeah.
in there,
Yeah.
and it does have things that'll tell you when things are or are not required. They do have, for instance, that new social determinants of health thing, the SDOH screen. That is, we have a new code for that, and you can or you don't have to do that. It says it's optional, but if you do it, it's separately reportable, so you can get
Separate.
paid an additional
Mhm.
fee for it. So that's
Right.
the other thing, that we were talking about as you go through here and you see all these criteria that they list. Some of them are separately reportable. They have separate G codes. And that's the thing. So too, we wanted to mention, right, was that, Medicare has their own special codes for these.
That's right. We have to be aware that CMS does their own thing, right? If they, these G codes are unique to the Medicare population, right? So we have to be very careful from a coding perspective as well. If you take a lot of these commercial plans as well, a Medicare Advantage is going to fall under a commercial arm, right? And Aetna, a AARP, et cetera, right? So you need to do your research and figure out, do they actually follow Medicare policy, or are they going to be following their big papa of United Health, right? Which is just commercial then. So you have to figure out, do the research. Everybody has a policy. Sometimes I do know it's hard to find the UHC policies, the Anthem policies. They're hidden around the interwebs, but you can find them and use them and make sure that you tell that to your practice, that we have to, follow these particular guidelines based on our payer metrics. Like, we can't just code everybody with a G code, because guess what? Those claims more than likely won't even go anywhere. It'll get rejected, right? For a lot of these particular payors, they will have edits in place to prevent the claim from even going through, because they've already addressed a hiccup, like you've used the wrong code.
I don't know what that is.
Right? Exactly. But so there's just lots of things that we don't really know what happened, with a direct emphasis on Penn State. We don't know. We are hypothesizing here. But from what those couple of words in the DOJ press release stated, that the medical record didn't support the AWV, right? So that's why we really wanted to make sure that we provide you guys with these links to this great roadmap that the CMS provides on what they expect to see, this beautiful laundry list of things for the patient's care, right? It's their AWV. So they really want to make sure, like you were saying earlier, that all of the buzzwords for their health system, from their mental health, everything, obesity, tobacco, all of that stuff, right, has to be well documented in the patient record to meet all of the criteria to support the codes for G0438 and G0439 for the initial and subsequent AWVs that the patient can have. So yeah, it's just fascinating that just from a couple of sentences, what my good friend and I here can do on compliance capers, right? We can really dive in a lot deeper to help practices understand what the deeper meaning is here for these AWV types of services that, should have really been audited a lot faster at Penn State, because the moment it's identified quickly, the corrective action can also happen quickly. So you're not out of $11 million. So
Yeah.
just my 2 cents there, but I mean, yeah.
Well, yeah, 2 cents compared to 11 million. Like,
Just my 2 cents. That's all I have. I have 2
you get to take
cents.
it, right? Right? Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Because with the annual wellness visit, the initial one, the G0438, it pays around $162, depending on locality and geographics, all that kind of stuff. And the subsequent one is around $128, $29, $30, depending again on your geographic location. So I mean, to reach almost $12 million, they are cranking these annual wellness visits out, right? So you want to make sure any service that you do an overabundance of at your practice, I mean, even if you're not the size of Penn State, I mean, you want to take a look at, if there is a certain procedure that y'all do a ton of times, or there is a certain service that you offer, or, you look when you're looking to do E&M stuff, look for, the levels that you kind of cluster around. You always want to be checking everything, but you always want to make sure you put an emphasis on those things that you do a ton of, just as a little kind of tip there, with the annual wellness visit, I said, they do have those other G codes that you can report for things. And in addition to that, EKG, the electrocardiogram, they used to bundle, when they first came out with annual wellness visits, an EKG was required.
Yeah, it was.
To do the annual wellness. You had to do it. And I remember it was a big deal because a lot of the practices don't have EKG machines. It's just not something they're like, we don't do it enough. We don't. So they would give the patient an order to go get the EKG done. And then when Medicare was auditing these and checking up on them, a lot of the patients would take the order and then never go get the EKG. So it was causing problems to the practice because they were like, well, it's not fulfilled. Well, it's not my fault. I did my part. I gave them, I even gave them the order. Sometimes they would make appointments and they wouldn't show up for the appointments. So now they separated it, and it is something that you can do. And they have a different set of G codes. So not the 90,000 codes in CPT. They have another couple of G codes that you can report if you're doing the EKG. And then they break it down, like, is it just the tracing? Is it their report? That kind of thing. But so that's something else that on top of those other screening codes, like the behavioral and the opioid and all that, that you could get paid separately for. Now, don't forget that you can also be paid for that EKG separately if y'all do it in the practice. And it's not required anymore So you're
That's
not
right.
having to hold the billing or check on it and make sure they got the EKG. So you could just bill the annual wellness visit. If they don't choose to get
That's
the
right.
EKG, well, then they just don't choose to do it, but it's not on you, but the annual wellness visits are pretty extensive in what they require. And they do take, quite a bit of time with the
They
patients,
do
which
take
is
time.
why they pay at that rate,
Yes, exactly.
because it's a lot of time to go through all that stuff. I feel like every provider that the patient has, you
Mhm,
have to go over all of their screening schedules, like, are you
mhm.
due for colonoscopy? Are you due for a mammogram? When was the last time you had this and this? All that stuff, because the idea behind the annual wellness visit is to make sure that the patient stays well and
Mhm.
doesn't get sick because they could have had a screening that would have caught something earlier.
That's right.
Medicare finally has gotten
Mhm.
onto the idea that, what, preventing somebody from getting cancer or getting these, that's kind of a lot cheaper than paying for all the stuff once they get sick, and
Exactly.
it's so much better for the patient. I would prefer, having a screening versus,
Mhm.
having some big long disease process,
Exactly.
but it took Medicare forever to finally get there with
Finally.
with these preventive things. And there's many different preventive screenings that they do now. And that's another, by the way, MedLearn Matters has another thing that CMS put out about all the preventive stuff. So, and I just thought of it now, or I would have put the link. I'll find the link for it and I'll add it in to the broadcast thing later, where they show a listing of every preventive service that Medicare pays for, and then they'll
Beautiful.
cover and what the criteria is. So for the mammogram, the PSA,
Mhm.
and the blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
So, that's something that if you see Medicare population patients as primary care, that's a great thing. If you don't know already, if you know
Right.
already, then, kudos to you. But if you don't, it's a great resource to be able
Mhm.
to use to say, hey, Medicare pays for all this stuff, and here's the criteria, or here's the medical necessity requirements like the ICD-10 codes,
Right.
stuff like that. So it'll give you all that kind of stuff. So I'll add that in too, because that's a great resource for offices and for people that may be
Mhm.
newer to coding, that don't know about those kind of things, where to find them.
That's great, Betty. Those are really great pro tips and points there that you made. Excellent. Absolutely. It's about time that CMS embraced these types of services, preventive care, right? It's a long time coming here in the US, right? That our
Yeah.
industry has finally shifted, that we have to make sure that the patients are well to begin with, right? Well to begin with. It's really difficult. To provide this high level of care after these diseases are already, you know, the cancer is found late, right? That's our
Yeah.
worst nightmare. That's our worst nightmare, to find that lump when it's already a stage 4, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a really great, valid point that finally these types of services are embraced and patients can now be happy as well.
Yeah.
To receive this kind of preventive care. Most
Yes.
importantly. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, we are up at our time limit, y'all. These have
Already?
been some good
My
discussions. I
goodness.
know, I know. I always go
Yeah.
like already, but these have been some good discussions this month on the SDPs, the self-disclosure protocols.
Yeah.
I think we've chosen some real good ones to talk about, ones that probably affect a lot of different practices and people that may be tuning in for us. So we hope that you found at least one, that will be helpful to you
Yeah.
in your practice, and or one that you might want to go be looking at in your practice to make sure you're okay with. But yeah, so next month we will be turning our attention to a new focus. So we'll have something new for y'all in the month of May to be looking at for our compliance capers. But we look forward to continuing to see y'all on our Fridays at 10 a.m. Central and 11 a.m. Eastern. Sonal, do you have any parting words for our final Friday in April?
Yes, my friend. I wanted to thank you. This was a great month of SDPs that you pulled for us to talk about. These were fantastic, fantastic and noteworthy, I hope, to the audience. So I hope they check them out further. I hope they found them useful. I know I certainly did. So yeah, I want to thank you, and I'm looking forward to a new month ahead of Compliance Capers. And I think we'll just leave everybody waiting for what our month is going to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
So just leave
Have to
them
watch.
leave them wanting more. Exactly. Exactly right, my friend.
It's always fun to do these with you, Sonal.
Oh, it's so much fun.
It's good. We're doing these, and I think hopefully, putting out some good information too. But they're
I
just fun
think
to
so.
do, no matter what. If nobody was watching, I'd still have fun doing these. So
Exactly. We still have a great time. So
we'd just probably be telling more inside jokes if there was nobody watching.
exactly.
But
Exactly right.
y'all have a fabulous Friday and enjoy your weekend. And we will
Yes.
see you on the next Compliance Capers. Bye, y'all.
Bye, everybody.